Okay, everybody, we're going to get started here. Just to tidy up a couple things before. Welcome to another Proline Academy session in our series for Strata Council members. My name is Catherine Squires-Basson. I'm the Director of Culture and Community here at Proline. As you may know, because we talk about it every time we do one of these, we offer a number of different opportunities for learning, both for our Strata Council members, this group today, and for residents and owners in our Strata communities. These sessions are opportunities for you to hear directly from service providers and other professionals and to learn more about the specific items that impact your strata communities. If you have any questions, as always, regarding these educational offerings, please feel free to reach out to me directly. You'll have my email, I'm sure. Please note also, it's always asked, today's session is being recorded. We will send a link out to everyone who was registered for the session once we've processed that recording. So you'll get an email directly in your inbox with a link to the recording that you can then share with other people who may not be able to attend. Questions are going to be addressed throughout the session, so please use that Q&A function, not the chat, to type in your question. That way everyone can see the questions and they can be addressed when it's appropriate during the session. Another thing, one last thing, this is a webinar, so no one can see or hear the attendees. Only the presenters are on screen and only the presenters are on mic, so you can relax. If you do need to talk to me, you can send me a message through the chat function and I can help you out or hopefully help you out with what you need. Now I'm going to hand it over to our speakers today. They don't need long introductions, thankfully. We are joined by Tony Gioventu, the Executive Director of CHOA, Condominium Homeowners Association of BC, and Andy Spurling, our President here at Proline Management. I'm going to pass it off to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. I just want to start off by saying thank you. I know we're all Strata Council members here, which means that you're all volunteers. So you're doing what can be a thankless job, what is an increasingly complicated job, and an increasingly busy job, and you're doing it with your own time, your own energy, and with the community interest in mind. So it's rarefied air. Not a lot of people are willing to step up and take on a role like that, but you all are. And it makes the way your community operates possible. It makes what we do possible. It's who Tony is trying to help out through his weekly columns and all the resources that CHOA provides. And so, again, just thank you, thank you, thank you for all of the time and effort and energy you put into what you do. That being said, I'm Andy. I am the president here at Proline. I've been back in the property management business for about 19 years now, about a month from now. And when I first came back, one of the earliest people I had the pleasure and honor of meeting was Tony, the closest thing I think we have to a bona fide celebrity in the strata orbit. So it's always nice to sit down with somebody kind of famous and talk. And over that 19 years, Tony, from my perspective, has been kind of the same thing. A level-headed, somewhat fired up from time to time spokesperson for homeowners in the condo industry as well as the industry in general, just making sure that as things evolve in BC, as they get more complicated, that his organization has a seat at the table, that they're doing their best to act in all of our best interests. And then really as a resource with no issue really being too small. He's been a huge resource and mentor for me in my time in the strat industry. And I know that's true for a ton of people on their team. So on our team, sorry. So it's a huge honor to be able to sit down with Tony. I always enjoy our conversations. I hope you do as well. They tend to be relatively unstructured and they go from place to place, but we hope in a way that's helpful for you all as Strata Council members. And so I think we're going to start out, for those of you that don't know, Tony has a weekly column in the Times Colonist called Condo Smarts. He's well into the over 1,000 articles now in there, which is incredible. And the last one touched on sort of the most recent, I guess, unexpected change that we've seen for strata communities. And there's been a lot of them in the last 5 years. Sort of these things that come out of an announcement that we all are then left to figure out what's going on, how's this going to impact the communities that we manage, how's it going to impact the communities that we live in for you as Strata Council volunteers. And this week's article touched on kind of the most recent round of those things. So Tony, maybe if you could start us off with just a few of the things that have happened in the last few years, or last couple of years anyways, that are sort of big changes for strata communities, both in terms of costs as well as the time and effort required to meet these new regulatory obligations.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, that's an overwhelming introduction. Thank you. That's very kind. By the way, I think we're almost at 1,300 columns now. It's pretty remarkable, actually. When I first started doing this in 2002, writing the columns for the Sun and for the Times, I kind of wondered if it was actually going to have enough content. Amazingly, it never stops. So there we go. And with the CRT now, with the tribunal in place, we have endless decisions that are overturning bylaws and disagreements and applications of strata corporations. So they're always a great resource for more columns and more information. But I think this week's highlight and this year really has to be the PST and the implications in the budget for strata corporations, which, to be perfectly honest, are about as clear as mud right now. So there are potentially implications for strata corporations. The information on the website has changed from last week to this week. So I'd say look for more changes. But as it stands right now, consulting fees and services such as strata management services, et cetera, are going to be subject to PST. But the appearance is that they apply to non-residential strata corporations. So these are going to be commercial malls, et cetera, like that. The challenge we have, of course, is we have actually thousands of mixed use commercial residential across the province. How is that going to apply? I have a feeling it's unknown at this point. And if it's a mixed use commercial residential, are they going to exempt the commercial, or is that actually going to require a separate calculation now in application to both commercial and exempting residential, which, to be perfectly honest, will be a bookkeeping nightmare, I think. That's especially where you're dealing with commercial residential mix with sections and the corporation. They're not segregated entities. You've got the corporation that encompasses everybody with strata management fees, as well as then you'll have separate sections for residential and commercial. It's a little bit of a bookkeeping nightmare, I think. So stay tuned. We'll keep probing. We'll keep asking lots of questions. It does have the appearance that consulting such as engineering consultants, which will also include our depreciation reports and our electric planning reports, may be subject to PST as well. But they've come up with a ratio that 30% of the service will be subject to the fee. That's the latest posting on the website. So again, it's not worth it considering the level of bookkeeping and administration that's going to be involved for the corporation. So I say stay tuned. We'll probably have a lot more clarity come July, August. And do we have to make big amendments to our budgets now to compensate for this? I think most people, if you're approving a spring budget, even if it comes into effect in October, it's not going to have that much impact on your corporations anyhow. So we'll keep probing for more clarity on how the PST is going to apply, under what conditions, under what categories, et cetera. So and in the duration, every owner, every strata council member, I recommend you contact your MLAs and just raise your voice on this issue. PST residential strata corporations have been PST exempt from consulting services, including real estate and management services. And now that we have mandatory requirements for the CRD and Metro Vancouver for our electric planning reports and depreciation reports, what we're really facing, of course, is those will be subject to PST possibly as well. So again, clarity on this issue will be really important. So hopefully it gets sorted out and worked out. But I knew about you, Andy, but this is one of those situations where it's a movable feast, I think. There might be a few moving parts on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting over my 20 years, just seeing how, I guess, consultation and collaboration with industry has evolved. And when the PST announcement came out, it used to be that we kind of had a bit of a heads up about what was coming, and there were working groups, and you could provide your feedback about the sorts of challenges you mentioned. Like, well, what do you do with a section? What do you do with mixed use, residential, commercial? Like, how are you now allocating this common cost amongst only one strata lot versus all these other ones when you're not in a type scenario? And things would kind of get ironed out. And now with the industry boards I'm on, it tends to be somebody sending an email saying, "Has anybody heard about this thing that just got announced?" And
Yeah.
then everybody saying, "No, I have no idea." And then sort of trying to find information. And our experience also when you're talking to housing or finances, they don't really know either. They're also trying to figure it out. So it's been really interesting to see that evolution of these announcements coming. And then there's this kind of tsunami-sized ripple effect where everybody tries to figure out how it's going to impact us. In terms of from our perspective, we feel really lucky to be part of all these boards and have the sorts of relationships we do with industry organizations like yourself, so that between us we figure it out as quickly as possible, and then we're able to share that information with our clients. But this is just like you say, Tony, one of those examples that last week the statement said different things than this week, and who knows how it'll all kind of shake out as the feedback now comes in. So it's been really interesting to watch. One of the things that I think could end up being a big impact on Stratus that we talked about briefly last week, which is a change that hasn't really been talked about from a strata perspective, is the change to property tax deferrals. There's, in BC, there's a huge amount of press and media around the impact on seniors and others who are able to take advantage of this program and what that change in insurance rate will look like, or sorry, an interest rate. But what we haven't seen or heard about really is the potential impacts on strata corporations. And I think there's at least one very significant one, which I'd be interested to hear your perspective on.
Yeah, so the property tax deferrals are not going to discontinue. That provision will remain, but the way that it's going to be taxed or charged now is substantially different. So it's now going to be much higher interest rate, but it's going to be compounded monthly. So I've checked several times. It doesn't look like that's a typo. Compounded monthly has an incredible ability of accelerating revenues for the government, but diminishing equity left in housing. So it isn't retroactive. So it doesn't apply to what's historically been deferred, but everything going forward. And if you're in a community with a large group of seniors that are doing property tax deferrals, and it's 10 years, 20 years, and you're talking about monthly compounding at a higher interest rate of the property tax deferral, it's quite a good possibility there may not be equity left if somebody is doing this for 10 or 20 years. So it's like in a strange sort of way, it's kind of like a reverse mortgage. In a reverse mortgage, within 10 or 12 years, you've lost your equity. It doesn't exist anymore. So, it's the same kind of accelerated way of imposing a fee or a charge. So, I think the vigilance really needs to be on strata corporations now. Treasurers, strata councils, property managers, don't let your accounts be delinquent because taxes take a priority over strata fees. I think that's the really important message here, is that you don't have priority over provincial or federal taxes. So, we've always had this comfort knowing that if we had to do an order for sale proceeding, or if there was an estate over top of mortgages and other trusts and other items that may be on the title, the strata corporation would take priority. The provincial deferred tax will take priority over strata fees. So there's a chance a strata corporation may not be able to collect an entire special levy or an arrears of strata fees. So, we run into this all the time with estates too. We'd actually not really talked about estates, but I think estates are a pretty important impact on communities, because you go through these protracted periods where if the estate has to be certified in probate in the courts, nobody's paying for anything. Bills aren't being paid for strata fees, nothing's happening. And then you build up these collections and you build up all of these costs. And at some point, you're hoping to collect. Well, if you have this insurmountable accelerated tax that's compounded now from deferment, there might not be any equity left for collections. So, I think everyone really needs to be vigilant now more than ever about collections to avoid these problems.
Yeah, and I think to sort of build on, we have a question about, which I think is often the obvious question, right? Like, if this can be a problem for us, are we allowed to say to our owners, "Are you deferring property tax?" so that we know where you're at? And unfortunately, these systems tend to sort of handcuff the corporate interest generally, like in this case, the Strata Corporation, and that people have the ability to do it. They don't have to tell you. And you really can't. I mean, you can always ask whatever you want, but technically you're not allowed to. And so that becomes that challenge is, I think to Tony's point, is, there's processes to follow and that you can follow when you've got a special levy that is approved and comes due, for example. I think in my experience working with so many Strata Council members over the years through so many of these projects is, you're doing this job because you want to help out your community. We generally get really great people on Strata Councils, and you're not there to create conflict or to be an adversary for somebody. And these situations can feel very adversarial when you've got a $50,000 special levy, it comes due, somebody isn't paying it. They're on a fixed income. There's all the human elements that are there. Like, we know who this person is. They've lived amongst us for often 20, 30 years. And now we're having to go down a process that feels very formal, very adversarial, that we know will result in, friction interpersonally, as well as costs to the owner that hasn't paid or is unable to pay. And I think historically, it was a little bit easier to work with people when you had one or two people in that scenario. Situations like this make it more challenging from a strata corporation's perspective because we can't know and we don't know what that scene is sort of in the background, whether there's any equity left, whether just because there's no mortgage on the strata lot doesn't mean that there isn't a huge tax liability that would now rank in advance of the strata's interests. So it feels like it's got the potential really to sort of take away what might have been the flexibility to work with people before without really prejudicing the Strata Corporation. I don't know if that rings true for you, Tony.
Yeah, no, it's a tough situation. Whether you're in a small strata of 10 units or 200 units, the pushback I always get from everybody who's paid their levies is, why is the strata not collecting against people who haven't paid their levies? And what's the incentive for us to pay if the strata is not doing that? And then in a short period of time, you create a different problem in your strata corporation where people habitually become delinquent. And I think what happens also, though, is that there is this confusion between must pay and may fine. So a strata corporation may fine for a violation of a bylaw, but owners, if you look at the standard bylaws and the act, owners must pay their strata fees. They must pay their special levies. It isn't an option. And certainly, everybody can have some compassion and we can stretch out the collection process a bit, probably 30, 60, 90 days. But at the end of that window, there has to be an action to protect the financial interests of the corporation. We're at a time in history where strata council members, they're all volunteers, they're held to a standard of care as a volunteer in a reasonably comparable situation. I'm not entirely sure that classification is going to extend forever. We may be coming to a time in history where council members who act unfairly, administer bylaws unfairly, are not administering financial obligations fairly. We may come to a time where that's no longer immune or protected by that volunteer status. So I think this is just mechanical. Get your financials reported. At least every 3 months, you should have an update on your financials and receivables. And then your strata council sits down and they make a decision. What are we doing with these receivables? Strata lot 14, issue a demand notice. Strata lot 27, we'll suspend the fines as the matter has been resolved. Strata lot 18, what are we doing about the insurance deductible? And minute these decisions so you have a record of having made the decisions. Because if you look at CRT decisions, oftentimes fines, penalties, and collection decisions are imposed without a decision of the strata council. And the property manager needs strata council to make a decision so they actually have the legal authority to go ahead with the collection process. There's this cascading effect of good decision making that really helps strata corporations a lot. But no, I think the property tax deferral issue is going to be, we'll see how it evolves. We'll see if it actually matures in the budget and how it actually gets implemented. But I think it could have a dynamic impact if it really is going to be compounded monthly. I kind of did a double take. I don't know many things that are compounded monthly. So I did a little bit of a double take and looked at it again, and sure enough, that's what it says. So, it has a chance of being fairly steep when it comes to costs.
And as we talked about with PST, that could all change. Like there's a sort of
I think
one
so.
question came through about
Yeah.
the ratios that are allowed, and I think those are some of the things that we don't have those details yet, and what kind of safeguards and guardrails might be put in place. If this sort of comes into being in October, and what that will look like in the final say. Hopefully there will be some of those, but that's kind of a to be determined. And I think no matter what happens with property tax, I think that it's one of those important reminders about how key process is. And, there's these processes that are out there, they're formal. Sometimes they feel adversarial because they require formal language, reference to acts. But in terms of protecting the interests of the Strata Corporation, especially with the CRT and all the other bodies out there now, if you're minuting these things, if you're following established processes, you're much more likely to get a better outcome if part of that process is a conflict down the road.
It kind of leads into the whole discussion, though, around user fees, too. We see the CRT overturning user fees lately. And the issue is not that user fees aren't enforceable. The issue is user fees have to be reasonably justified. It isn't just a cash grab. And you can't charge for things in your strata that you don't have an approved user fee for. I also think that user fees are much better served if they're in your bylaws. They're not as easy to change, but they're easier to defend. So move in, move out fees, good example. It's just not a $200 cash grab when somebody moves in or there is a move out. If the strata is not doing anything, if you're not providing janitorial services, or you're not doing inspections and recovery for nicks and dings and damage in the building, or you don't have additional security. Look closely at your bylaws and rules, of course, for user fees, and make sure they're reasonably justified. We kind of had a glimpse of justification for user fees when the regulations came in for electric vehicle charging. The strata corporations are permitted to charge for a certain number of costs associated with electric vehicle charging, the infrastructure, a share of the infrastructure, the electrical services, maintenance, but they need to be identified within the rule or the bylaw. From a CRT perspective, I think they're going to be easier to defend if they're bylaws, but you have to kind of be articulate. Fobs and keys were the other thing we were talking about, right? A replacement of fobs. Each fob's $100. Sure. So you ask yourself, where do we get the authority to charge $100? Well, either we have a user fee or they're paid for through strata fees, one of the two. You don't get to have a standalone charge for other services as a strata corporation. So, it's a great time to do a little housekeeping. Check your bylaws, check your rules, make sure your user fees are justified.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges with some of those user fees, and I think FOBs is a great example, is just how I think for probably 15 years, FOBs were the same price.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of keeps escalating. And so, as you say, you do some housekeeping and you get yourself to this point, you decide we're going to put it in our bylaws because that's where it's going to be most enforceable. And then, FOBs go up 35% the next year. So it's kind of a constant dance. And I think the bylaws in general are that, they're never really a set it and forget it document.
No.
And with the amount of change that we see and we have seen in the last number of years, I don't think it doesn't feel like they're going to get to be that again in the foreseeable future. It's like almost an annual need to see where we're at and what's come up in the last year that we might need to respond to.
I think with respect to FOBs, we'll see the end of them within the next 10 years because we're now seeing most entry systems and access system converting to phones. They're just same as your electric vehicle is managed off of your phone. You're going to start in some newer buildings. I'm already seeing this where the phone is used as the access point, and Yes, it tracks everyone who comes and goes. And yes, it tracks where you've been, what you're doing. So you take it to the next level and say, okay, what means we're also going to have to update is our privacy bylaws, giving us the permission to collect this information and how it's administered and who's entitled, et cetera. So yeah, we're starting to see that transition occurring now. So, user fees usually have a connection to privacy as well.
Yeah. So just to wrap up the lien thing, because we have one question about it, and I think this is a nice way to alleviate some concerns with the legal process. But the question is really like if you put a lien on a unit, you go to enforce your lien through the forced order of sale process, and then in the end, there's not enough money to pay your lien, and there's all these other liabilities. Can the strata actually find itself, and we'll keep the legal fees aside, taking on the liabilities of a strata lot that it puts a lien against for a special levy, or does that lien only work sort of to protect the strata corporation to the extent that funds are available?
Yes, would be the answer, really. The lien, don't be delinquent in your collections. So number of emails and calls in the last few weeks of strata corporations who are actually going back and saying, look, this person owes 2 years of strata fees and they owe a special levy. Why are you waiting 2 years? This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The Limitation Act may potentially come to play here on collections, but more important, if you're not acting in a reasonably prudent time, you're going to have some other issues. And collection issues, it may come down to the point. Right now is not the issue, but in the future, as we go down with the kind of the compounding effect of deferred taxes, that could have an impact. The other thing, though, for people who are deferring their taxes, individuals, think about this. Most people transition from independent living to some sort of support living. And your ability to get into good quality support living is often directly linked to your ability to sell your home at a reasonable price. If you are deferring your taxes, and that's going to have a negative impact on what your equity looks like, it has the ability to affect the quality of your life or the financial capacity you have to have some sort of support living as well. So, my hope, everyone stays in their homes as long as absolutely possible. It's support living centers, independent, whatever they are very expensive for decent quality. And so don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to have to rely on equity from your home. That is going to decline. Be realistic. The equity will decline in the home.
Yeah, it's been fun. We've sort of spent the first half of this session looking backwards at what's happened and what will come as a result of that. Now to sort of look forwards a little bit and do a little bit of crystal ball gazing, which I know that you're incredible at. And one of the items that's actually come up as a council question is proxies. And proxies have they've presented various types of challenges over time through COVID and electronic meetings and, sort of figuring out what the process looks like, what they need to look like. But one of the things that gets talked about that, there's some whisperings of change around is maybe some limitations on proxies. Like, you've got these meetings where an owner shows up with 50 proxies and, you can kind of you look over them, you make sure the names are there, and then you kind of have to take them as being reasonably issued, and then that person can control the meeting. And if that person is not on council, who knows? They don't have the same obligations as a council member to act in the best interest of the strata. Who knows what they might be telling people? And so what do we see in your mind coming of the proxy issue? Like what changes might come, and then what changes would actually maybe make the most sense from a strata perspective?
So it's interesting because we look at other jurisdictions. We share a kind of a consult group around the Pacific Basin. Australia and New South Wales have implemented a new law that limits the number of proxies or the percentage to 5% of the eligible votes, which is a significant limitation, but it doesn't really solve the problem that is really being identified, where you have a controlling interest of individuals who have all the proxies, controlling council, controlling the business, management, everything else. That won't really solve the problem because it only takes 3 or 4 or 5 people in that same group to collect 5% each, and they still probably control the outcome of the meeting. There are plenty of discussions happening right now about what to do about proxies. And there's 2 options that I think need some serious consideration. The first is similar to the Societies Act, that the proxy is modified. So like the Societies Act, it's actually a vote. It's a ballot. So as the owner, when you submit your proxy, it wouldn't be a proxy in the conventional sense anymore. You will now be submitting your vote for the budget, for the nominated council members, etc. If that were to occur, probably would eliminate the ability to do amendments at meetings. But then again, amendments aren't that frequent anyhow. So, and realistically, if a budget is not going to be approved by the owners, I'm always uncomfortable with significant amendments of a budget, because there's so many people who simply are not there. More than half, almost invariably, are not there. And then they're really surprised to discover that the reserve contribution this year was raised from 50,000 to 200,000, and their strata fees are going up 25%. So, there are certainly some issues around that. The other possibility for
Sorry, just to interject, but I think one of the interesting things about an option like that is in the earliest days of the pandemic, we actually got a little bit of a taste of what that could look like and feel like as we were, as the management industry, trying to grapple with how do we go fully electronic. And at the beginning of those times, having some of those limited sort of restricted proxies gave us a blueprint for that. And in many of the ways, it actually did simplify a lot of those issues, because you were not able to amend anything and the votes were cast. The AGM became a very different kind of experience in lots of ways for those that couldn't make it, and that same kind of lobbying that can happen seemed to be less so. So it's interesting that we've done it before for about 3 months.
Even though it wasn't lawful, it happened.
Yeah.
It was the emergency
it was necessary
response,
in the moment,
right? Yeah, it was the emergency response to an emergency situation. And the other modification, if we do that, is that those proxies, those votes, and absentee votes, become part of the records of the Strata Corporation. So under Section 35, so there's a full level of transparency around it. I'm afraid, though, that we have to think of the consequences of that. And I think one of the consequences is far fewer people will attend meetings. And what's the implication on quorums? And how are we actually managing those meetings separately? And what happens if everybody just mails in a ballot and you're just a property manager sitting in a room? How does this work? How are you electing council, and how is there any knowledge within the community? So part of the essence of meetings is community building as well. So, it's certainly worthy of a good discussion. The other side of this is, don't restrict proxies, but at general meetings, proxies cannot be used for the election of strata councils. And that will prevent interest groups who control large numbers of votes from controlling what strata councils look like. And that may be a better balanced way of doing this. So there are plenty of discussions, plenty of options to look at. Advanced nominations for councils also would be really helpful. Some stratas actually have this in their bylaws, and they can't enforce it because anyone eligible at the meeting is eligible to be nominated and elected. But you could create a model where you have advanced nominations of strata council. So people are pre-qualified. Their interest and commitment is qualified. Who they are they an owner? I have to say, in my experience, and I chair now, I only do online meetings anymore. I don't do in-person meetings any longer, but I still chair 6 to 8 meetings every month. I'm surprised at how frequently, when we go through the roll or the list of owners who are nominated for council, the number who say, well, I'm not on title. You're not eligible for council. You might be a spouse of an owner, or there may be some other relationship, but unless you're a tenant or an owner, there's a restriction. So it would help to clarify many of those situations. There could be even declarations. People who are being nominated fill out a declaration that, I'm an owner, I'm a registered owner, I'm eligible for council, I'm in good standing with my strata fees, special levies, whatever. We could improve this part of the system, I think, to make it easier for meetings.
I think it highlights 2 things as well, which is the that idea that sometimes in trying to solve a problem, we just create a whole bunch of other unanticipated problems because we haven't thought about them. So just as you said, if all of a sudden an AGM was just filling out a form and emailing it back or mailing it in, whatever it looks like, and now you're sitting in an empty room, what's that going to do to a problem that many Strata Council members listening to this are probably
Yeah.
experiencing right now is how do I replace myself in this place eventually?
Yeah.
Because, there's like a different level of engagement now than there might have been 10 years ago. And so in terms of the community building exercise, like you say, having people at the meeting engaged and then willing to put their hands up is super important because you could end up finding yourself with crickets. It used to be that we could close the door and say, we're not leaving here until we've elected a strata council. In the electronic world, that's a little more difficult. But it's that same kind of idea, right? It's you don't want to lose those opportunities to engage people in what's going on at the strata. And that can be one of those challenges. And then I think the other piece of it is that process piece. Like even if your bylaws, even if your process is that we want nominations, like you say, somebody can show up and put their hand up during that day. My own experience over the years has been that when a strata has a process for something like that, it tends to just be implicitly respected. And not that somebody might not come and make a stink, but it just doesn't tend to happen as much. When there's established norms in communities, they tend to continue to exist. It seems like there's just a deference given to them that isn't necessarily there when things are just totally flexible.
They're very well organized. Yes. Yep. Electric planning reports.
Yeah.
There's a whole new level of cost and reports for people. Sorry, I have a 5-month-old puppy in the background doing bad things. Electric planning reports are kind of interesting. They are necessary, no doubt. The number of buildings, properties we deal with, especially bare lands and townhouse complexes that have reached their capacity of power. And now we have people wanting to convert gas furnaces to heat pumps. We have hot water heat pumps that are going in. We have electric vehicle charging. All these conversions are wonderful in reduction of GHG emissions, and their performance is superb. But many of these communities weren't designed for these additional, basically electrical slaves on the system. So electric planning reports were introduced so that strata corporations would be aware of what their capacity was. How much power do we have? How much is currently used? And then the evaluation. If we looked at everybody converting to these different types of components, then how much more power do we need in our community? Strata corporations in phases we're also finding are the ones that are really dynamically affected. Generally, we're finding one of the 2 or 3 phases will have enough electrical capacity to basically meet every contingency, but the second or the third phase often won't. And that's also an issue for people. And then we get back to this whole issue of kind of like first converted, first served. So if you've already installed a charging station and you put a heat pump in to replace your furnace, you're putting a lot of pressure on the grid within your community, but you're probably preventing somebody else further down the road from having this work done. So, I think electric planning reports certainly have a really good place. It's a one-time charge. It's a one-time report. We're not really sure whether that consulting fee is going to apply or not. For the CRD, Metro Vancouver, and the Fraser Valley, those reports are due this year.
There's a question about who they might not be applicable to. And so that idea, you've now got a new community that's, got electrical vehicle charging stations for all the units. They've already got heat pumps. They're still doing this report, even though they've got all the things that these reports are supposed to.
Makes no difference. No difference. 5 units or more. The rare exception is basically what we refer to it as a summary report. Simply identifies you're a bare land of 6 units. Each unit gets a direct service line from the hydro distribution. You don't have one distribution system within your community, but almost every townhouse and bare land strata has a distribution system. So, our comment is be cautious about the reports that are recommending that you need substantial electrical upgrades to meet your future needs, because there are actually many management systems available that really work quite well. So here's one. So I've just purchased a new appliance, replaced our washer and dryer with a single full-size washer dryer combination in one unit. It has a heat pump in it, and it draws 60% of the power on 110 that a dryer conventionally draws, and it has to be one of the best appliances I've ever seen. These things are outstanding. And so, it's also ventless. So we no longer have a dryer duct issue. We don't no longer have a condensation issue in the same way with dryer ducts and venting. We no longer have the issue of over demand on capacity of electrical. So, we're seeing these dynamic changes on appliances. Technology is usually 10 years ahead of legislation. I think now it's like 25 years ahead of legislation. So, I look at all of the different types of power management systems that are available. Don't just say, well, everybody's on their own. If you're in apartment buildings, if you have underground parking and you have EV charging, make sure you have a management system so you're not overburdening the system. And there isn't anyone who needs a level 3 charger. There really, it's an 80 or 120 amp charger that'll charge your car in 20 minutes. Go to one of the Petrocan service stations. They all have them. Do a boost charge there if you're really that desperate. But level 1 and level 2, more than sufficient for electric vehicles that are charging overnight. And you can, through management systems, you can moderate that. So it's offsetting in periods, lower billing periods, and also lower demand. So get your planning reports done. We have some new guides and some new requests for proposals coming out, so people can clearly articulate what they're requesting for these reports.
I think it's there's a couple of questions that aren't about these reports specifically, but I think it's a nice segue into this notion of complexity. And so there's always been a certain level of complexity to living in a strata community and managing it and everybody coexisting. And that hasn't really changed. But now we do have these different layers, and even things that used to be less complex, it felt like getting a warranty claim assessed.
Yeah.
Has just gotten sort of more and more difficult. We're seeing with the way that land's being developed, more cost sharing agreements and, like sort of air parcels and all these different things that just, for all of us, they're complex. For Strata Council volunteers, they're even more so, because often you're coming into a strata community not knowing much about stratas in general, and now you find out that there's an airspace parcel, and now there's these electrical planning reports and carbon reporting coming up, and all these different things. Like, do you have sort of some best practices or some tips for Strata Council members and sort of understanding and managing these complexities, sort of in addition to going to all the great CHOA seminars that address some of these, but sort of like on a day-to-day basis, all of these different levels of complex relationships, like how can we manage those the best?
The best practice, and we do this for my own building, best practice I recommend to everyone: hire the right people who are knowledgeable and experienced to provide you with interpretation of the reports and summaries of the reports. Airspace, you mentioned airspace parcels. They're an absolutely perfect example. Airspace parcel agreements are anywhere between 150 and 800 pages, depending on how many airspace parcels there are and the complexities of the relationships. They are just mired in technical language, defining boundaries, spaces, liabilities, responsibilities, and cost sharing. Someone needs to take those and they need to summarize the report in very clear, defined schedules so you can understand who is paying for what. And if you've identified that you're paying for something that has absolutely nothing to do with your strata corporation, you need to identify what options you may have with regards to this, because historically we see a lot of commercial or neighboring property responsibilities downloaded onto the residential strata corporations that they have absolutely no use or responsibility for. When you're doing things like depreciation reports, doing your renewal of your insurance policies, if you're in an airspace parcel, it's absolutely essential that the service provider, whether it's insurance or whether it is the depreciation planner, it's absolutely essential that they have an understanding of those summary documents, because you may be identifying components that you have a responsibility for that they were totally unaware of. They would have no way of knowing about it. And don't rely on your depreciation planner or the electric planning consultant or the insurance provider to disseminate these agreements. They're very complicated. But there are, most of the legal professionals do a very good job at creating a summary document to navigate these. So put some money aside. It's a one and done kind of thing, though. Put some money aside, get these things well evaluated and analyzed. Makes all the difference in the world.
I think that one of the one and done things that is an early process, but it's not necessarily one and done. But I think the answer is the same. Is that warranty side, like the frustration around the warranty experience seems to just grow a little bit more every year, as it seems to be that a lot of these warranties are just a brick wall process where you report the challenges. You hire an engineer, they go through, they identify all these things, you send them off to the warranty company, and they're like, nope, not doing it. And if there's a technical way they can get out of it, they will use it every time. And it feels like it used to be a process that was a little more collaborative, vis-a-vis the strata and the developer and the warranty provider, which has now kind of become increasingly adversarial, which I think, again, there's a bunch of lawyers on the strata bar that have the ability to help you there. But it feels like more and more, especially if the warranties are serious and not aesthetic in nature, that you're almost going to have to put that money aside for some legal representation just to get what you might have got from a process that was collaborative, 5 and 10 years ago.
Well, here's one of the problems we have with residential properties, high-rise apartments, bare-lands townhouses. But high-rise buildings, apartment buildings, mid-rise, low-rise buildings, we don't commission our buildings. If you were an industrial property owner and you hired a contractor, you had consultants and engineers, they designed the building for you. The general contractor built the building. Your consultants and engineers will then go through that building system with a fine-tooth comb in the first year and determine that everything that you paid for, you got it, and that it's operating, it's performing at its premium levels. We don't do this with residential buildings. So what we end up doing is we end up responding to a failure rather than understanding whether our building is actually performing well or not. And some of our basic systems, it's really worth doing a commissioning for them. Our HVAC systems, our elevators, our electrical mechanicals, these are systems that if they're not performing, they may perform at a sub-level for 10 or 15 years. And then you discover that you have some serious defects or deficiencies, which you're solely left, that could have been dealt with in the first year. So, it's one of the unfortunate sides of residential buildings is that we have volunteers. I love that process, who are now the property owners, but they don't have the experience to do commissioning on buildings. It's a time period, it's an exercise that is incredibly valuable. If I was on a strata council of a new high-rise building, I would absolutely want to have the building properly commissioned within the first year. That's where you get your real sustenance of warranty claims to come through and get them filed and reported right away.
Perfect. And then I want to spend a little bit of time on depreciation reports. We've talked about electrical planning reports and kind of new regulatory complexity, and we've spoken about depreciation reports a little bit in the context of taxes, but there's a very specific question about, we know that every 5 years you need a depreciation report. There's a specific question about, we're a brand new building, so how long do we have to get our first depreciation report? But I think for council members, in my own view, depreciation reports of all the things that have been mandated during my time in the industry have been the most important, because of the ability they give a strata council working with us to sort of plan budgetary requirements now and in the future, and just this sort of the inventory it provides you of all of your systems and what to be looking at. And they're not like It's not a document that you can follow to the letter, and it generally doesn't make sense to.
Yeah.
But as a planning guide, they're incredibly important. And I think about another article I saw this week that an AI company had done in the strata space, saying that in BC, all these strata owners are going to have $4,000 to $8,000 a year special levies, which seems rather strange because that's not how it tends to work anyways. But their point was, we're massively underfunded here. We take pride in working with our Strata Corporation clients to make sure that they are funded adequately for their depreciation report and sort of their major capital maintenance coming up in the next 5 and 10 years. But I'd love for you to just take a few minutes sharing your views on kind of again, some best practices for a strata council with their depreciation report and how to use it for budgeting and long-term maintenance planning.
So we do one-on-one workshops with strata councils when they're wanting to look at their depreciation reports and figure out what the kind of the sequence of what's coming. And we use the 5 and 10 year model. What are the big items in the next 5 years, next 10 years? And that will, of course, change every year as you go forward. If you can fund a portion of those in the next 5 or 10 years, invariably you can save quite a lot of money. You can create a situation where you are probably proactively maintaining or at least renewing your building systems. And that proactive maintenance and renewal is going to make a big difference to the performance of your buildings. Anytime you wait until a building system fails to do response, especially building systems like hot and cold domestic water and roofing and exterior systems, you add 30 to 50% to the cost by the time it's failed. Proactive renewals make a huge difference. And the other side of the next 5 to 10 years, start saving money. Yes, you could add $20 or $50 a month to strata fees. That could go a long way to offsetting special levies that really can become a hardship for everybody. So, put the chart into the cycle, 5 or 10 years, right?
Easily my favorite legislative change, I think, in the 20 years I've been doing this almost, was that ability to take money from the reserve fund on a majority vote for items that are listed in the depreciation report. Like as soon as that shift was there, where you didn't need to meet what can be a very difficult threshold, particularly in smaller buildings, to do anything, we just got to see buildings maintained and repaired way more proactively and to such a higher degree of quality, because you're not trying to do always the cheapest repair or replacement, because you're not asking people to write a check. Like it's amazing to me how different that just that need to write a check to pay that extra cost, like it changes entirely how any project is viewed. And so, there's going to be projects like full envelope replacement where special levies are just going to be a reality. You're not going to have $22 million sitting in your reserve account for a high rise to redo your exterior envelope. But
exactly.
Short of that, like you talk about makeup air systems and all these different systems. If you can plan to need special levies for none of those, you're going to be able to maintain them with such a greater ease. Just having that in your depreciation report, both because it's a majority vote, but people also get to see it coming, and it's not the surprise factor isn't there to the same degree.
Well, a good example of that is over in the Tri-Cities area last fall. I chaired a meeting where they approved $3.5 million worth of repairs from their reserve fund for 4 out of 6 of their buildings to do roofing, hot and cold domestic water, an elevator upgrade. It took 10 minutes and 1 majority vote resolution. Nobody had a special levy. Everything is underway. The projects are underway this year. There was no dispute, no fight. Everyone was really happy to just approve the work. And they've been planning and doing this for quite some time. And there's a few projects that are, large community projects. Nanaimo has a few. There's a number up in Vernon, Kelowna area, where they're actually adopting plans for the long-term renewal of some of their components. Makes a big difference. And you're absolutely right. This majority vote to approve depreciation items is just a godsend for strata corporations. Makes a remarkable difference. We contribute by majority, we approve by majority. And if you don't have special levies, it reduces a lot of conflict in communities.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I've noticed in my time working with strata corporations is how much a healthy financial situation in your operating account and in your reserve fund help communities. Like,
Yes.
we think a lot about, how do you build community? How do you get people engaged? How do you get people out to volunteer? And one of
Yeah.
the sort of things that we noticed over time was just how often those stratas that even when they don't need to put up their strata fees, put it up 2 or 3% and then put all of that into their reserve funds, everything actually ends up being easier. They tend to have social events and the conflict, like bylaw conflict is very minimal. It's really interesting to see how that intention to sort of have a healthy financial situation in your community also then extends to the other elements on so
Yeah.
many levels.
Great harmony in the communities when you don't have financial conflict. I
Yeah.
think it's strata corporations are just another family. And what do families fight about all the time? Money or the
Yeah.
lack, right? That's usually what
Yeah.
it comes down to. So, plan to support your communities. Nobody wants their strata fees to go up 50% or 75%. But look at the incremental changes you can be making that really do make a significant difference over time. Just a little note, I use my building as a comparison all the time. 250 unit high rise building. We have 5.8 million in our reserves. We generated as much interest this year as we contributed. So we've actually doubled our contribution this year, which was substantial. And it's made all the difference in the world because we have some major projects coming up. There'll never be a discussion around special levies. The money is there for the planned purpose of what's coming. And we're not deferring work this way. We actually have a capital meeting in a week where we're seriously going to talk about the projects this year that are a priority that have to be done. So, the planning makes all the difference in the world. Just plan, and try to fund as much as you can.
Process planning, two important pieces of strata corporations. I think we're actually going to be able to answer all the questions, which is kind of incredible because I wasn't sure that that would be possible. But we've got 3 minutes left, and so another question came. Perfect. That's a challenge. We'll try and meet it. There's a question about Indigenous land claims, the Cowichan Tribes decision, what that impact that will be for strata councils and owners, and just in general, what sort of the impact of reconciliation will look like. I think that we probably don't have those answers. If you've got an answer that you can share, Tony, right now, but I think like so many people, it's the ripple effects are to be determined. We're going to see how things play out in the coming years.
I think my answer is be prepared to be in healthy dialogue with your neighboring property owners, with the neighboring bands. Be prepared to understand the considerations that are being put forward, what the expectations are. I think we'll see this is going through the courts again. So we will see what the outcome of that looks like. And I would hope that those people who are on a much higher pay grade than I am, who deal with land claims and Indigenous claims and property rights, will be able to come up with a solution that is acceptable and reasonable for everybody. So, it's I know I'm speaking like a politician, but really it just is going to take some time to resolve this. And I wouldn't be panicking if I was a property owner at this point.
I see there we didn't actually answer the question of I'm a new strata corporation. When do we need to have our first depreciation report done by? And then a sort of subsequent part of that is who enforces it. Is there a depreciation report police?
Right. So if you're a new strata corporation, I'm not sure what new means. Does that mean 2016, 2015,
Let's
2014?
say March 1st, 2026. We're brand new.
Okay, March 1st, 2026, you have till 28 to basically get your depreciation report together. There's a window of time for this. But if there's a possibility that the consultants are going to be taxed PST for this, might want to get it done earlier. It doesn't hurt to get it done earlier, because if you get it done earlier, you can start using it for your modeling and your funding. There is going to be a deadline limitation period of 18 months for compliance after you're a new strata corporation. But yeah, I would start looking at what your options are though to get it done earlier.
And if you don't get it done, really owners could take you to the CRT to get it done. You're going to start potentially having problems with mortgage lenders and insurance. And
Sales.
there's
You,
so it
yeah.
there's not a depreciation report police, but it will become uncomfortably uncomfortable if you choose not to go ahead with a depreciation report.
You won't be able to produce a compliant Form B information certificate either.
Yeah.
And that is going to create some significant liability for the corporation. So it's not worth deferring it. No, nobody regulates it. No, you don't file them anywhere, but you do have to get them completed.
Yeah. And then the last question, and this is a bit of a complicated one because they show up in many forms, but guest suites and property tax and speculation tax. You've got guest suites that are often part of the common property, especially in older communities. In newer communities are often individual strata lots that are owned by the strata corporation, which is where a lot of the complexity arises. But what can you share with us in 1 minute or less on guest suites and taxation authorities?
So it's really the vacancy tax, right? That's what's coming up here. If they are part of the common property, they're not on the radar screen because they're not a titled property. And if they're a guest suite that you are getting notices of vacancy tax, my comment is contact the reporting agency, provide documentation, identify the capacity and use of the guest suites, and the limitations on them, that they may or may not be occupiable in some other way other than as a temporary guest suite, and request accommodation. I don't think anybody put their mind around guest suites when they were looking at the vacancy tax. It just came as an afterthought, really.
Perfect. Well, that takes us to 102. We're a couple minutes late. I know, Tony, that your time, as always, is appreciated. It's valuable. You've got another meeting to head to as well right after this. So I want to thank you for your time, your wisdom,
Oh, it's a
your
pleasure.
energy, and everything you do for the industry. Again, thank you to all the council members that were able to be here today. And maybe most importantly, because Tony and I talk a lot about things that would be fun to do, but without Catherine there to make sure these things actually happen and set everything up for us, they wouldn't. So most importantly, thank you, Catherine, for putting this together. We hope that this has been helpful for you. Again, I mentioned the CHOA seminars earlier. If you haven't been to them, they are absolutely excellent. I highly recommend them. They're happening all the time. So get yourself subscribed to those so that you know what's coming up. Feel free to take them. If you have questions for Tony or I, we may seem like busy people, but we're not that busy. Just send us a note and we'll do our best to answer it for you.
Sure, I'm sure we could find an extra hour or two after 80 during the week. I was going to say also, we're doing town halls around the province, and in April, we're doing one in Victoria. So if you want to come out and ask questions, and hopefully we'll have more updates on the information for people by then.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. Any
Great.
final words, Catherine?
Just logistics as usual. Just a reminder, it's recorded. So I will be sending a link and you can rewatch sections if you got distracted or want to share with others, please do. It's all going to also be on our YouTube channel, as are all of the sessions that we've done in the past. So you can go there to learn things about a wide variety of topics. If you have questions or comments about what we offer or suggestions of what we could offer, send me an email. Please don't send me the questions you're going to send to Andy and Tony. Those are very different questions. You'll get very different answers from me. And there is a survey at the end of the session. So if you can fill that out with any comments, that's also really helpful. We're always working on new sessions and they come up every month with a few breaks over the summer. So keep your eyes open for those. And thanks again for coming and
Great.
participating.
Thanks. Thanks for the
Thanks,
invite.
everybody.
See you again
Bye,
soon.
guys.
Cheers. Bye for now.